And I think the glass that we're seeing already is outstanding. That 50mm at that price point is outstanding. Hello everybody, it is so good to see you today. How you doing? Now, it's not every day that I do a comparison film, but in this particular case, these are two cameras that I actually use. They're two cameras that are closely related and they are closely spec'd and they were released fairly close to each other. Of course, we are talking about the Sony A7R III 42 megapixels and the Nikon Z7 at almost 46 megapixels. I think it's 45.6 or 45.7. These are mirrorless cameras. Now, I've been working with mirrorless cameras. The first one I actually got was the Nikon V in 2012, and then I got the A7R, the original A7R, in 2013. I was very excited by the idea of mirrorless, the idea that it brought a much smaller camera for you to be able to work with. But in the end, the A7R was a disappointment because Sony crippled the RAW files and actually compressed them. And allegedly it used exactly the same 36 megapixel chip that was in the D800. I had the D800 and a direct comparison between the two cameras showed very clearly that the D800 had much better files that weren't compressed. So today I want to talk about my real world observation, real world usage, the ergonomics, how does it hold in your hand, how do the buttons work, the viewfinders, which is better, which is worse, the focus, the autofocus, some of the real world things we do. I, for example, don't shoot high shutter speeds. So, you know what? Off the top of my head, I'm not even sure what the maximums are on either of these cameras because I don't do it. I'm not a guy. I don't need 10 frames a second. I can only remember once in the last 5 years where I was photographing an exploding piece of concrete for a TV ad. The TV camera was shooting and I was shooting stills. They asked me to do it. The TV, they were using a Red of some description or an Arri Alexa. It could shoot at 120 FPS, 4K. There was kind of just no point in me doing it. I got my D4 out. I could do something like 16 frames per second. Anyway, the point I'm making is I never do it. And another interesting thing I've done here is I've gotten the two lenses that I have that are closest to each other. And this is the Nikon 51.8 and S and the Sony 1.8 55. So 50mm, 55mm, both 1.8s. The first thing that's interesting to me is that the Nikon is quite a lot larger. And I suppose it has a little bit to do with that mount because they're both 1.8s. The focal lengths are almost the same. They should be very similar in size. And the prices were fairly similar. If I remember, this was around 1,000 and this is around 1,000 here in this country when I bought this. Now, I bought this lens on launch because something that is often forgotten about the Sony E-mount is it had exactly the same complaint that came with the Nikon Z-mount, and there wasn't a lot of glass in the beginning. And strangely, they had the same pattern of release, which of course 6 or 7 years ago nobody remembers, but I remember. So I got this was the first lens I got. This one right here, the 55. Of course, Nikon came out with a 50 straight away, and they're both 1.8. They then came out with a 24-70 f4, and they also had a 35. Now, their 35 is a 2.8, which I have that lens as well. Nikon's 35 is a 1.8. So, and they both only had like 3 or 4 lenses in the beginning. So for those Sony users out there, I mean, you know, any new system is going to take a little while to get rolling. And Sony did exactly the same thing in 2013 when I got the original A7R, which I still have, and a couple of these lenses, which I still have, because this is still a great camera. Let's start off by talking about image quality. The Sony has a look to me which is a little bit more processed, a little bit more sharpened, a little bit more tweaked. The Nikon, from my perspective, and I've been using digital Nikons now for 15 years, it has a bit more of a natural feel. When shooting RAW, you can adjust, tweak, change, and get your files to really, you can get any camera to look like any other camera. So largely, not completely, they all have some really subtle differences, but at the end of the day, you're going to get 95% of the way there. But what I'm ultimately saying by all of that is I prefer the files that come out of the Nikon. They just feel a bit more natural. And then if you want to go from natural to somewhere else, so you have a kind of zero baseline, I find it's easier to go from that zero baseline to where you want to go. Whereas these ones, I don't know, they're just a bit crunchier. I can't quite put my finger on it. I don't think it's a resolution thing because we're talking basically 3.5 megapixels between the two. So there's something going on there. I prefer the color of the images out of this one. From an actual resolution perspective, it's much of a muchness. And in my releases of books and calendars and original prints, I've used both cameras. And in essence, you can't really tell the difference. The next thing I want to talk about after image quality is video image quality. I've got a piece that I'm working on at the moment, which is where I've photographed with the D850, the Z7, and the Sony, all side by side shooting the same thing. And the fact that at the end of the day, you can grade it all again to look pretty similar. They're both shooting 4K, which is great. They both give you up to 30 frames per second, which is great. They both do 120 frames at 1080p, which is great. So they're very similar cameras. Probably the advantage of the Sony is, but I have to say, it's now, since the firmware updates that Nikon have done on the Z, the autofocus system is probably slightly better. And when I say that, I mean in regards to face detect, and I mean in regards to low light situations. In a standard light situation like we're in right now, no dramas. They both acquire focus and then their lenses get there very quickly. They both do that well. So I'm not finding any discernible, perceivable, real world where it causes me differences between the two. Now there's a lot of hyperbola on the internet that the Z's a fail. It's just completely incorrect. If you're actually out there and shooting and doing stuff for real, which rather than looking at the specs, and you're doing it over and over again and you're getting used to the ambiguities and the differences of the two cameras, these guys are very similar. Now the only situation that I would say this camera can't keep up with the Sony is low light, high speed. If you want to be shooting sports at night, under lights, in a stadium, and that's something that you do all the time rather than once a year to shoot your kid's grand final, then, and you can choose, if you can choose to go, you're starting in a new system, then sure, right now, today, the Sony is a little bit better, but it's only a little bit. I'm not saying it doesn't work, I'm just saying it's a little bit slower. 95% of the time, these two things are pretty equal, and that 5% of the time, which you may hardly ever use, I'd give this a 10 out of 10 and I'd give this an 8 out of 10. So if you never do that sort of stuff, if you're like me and your landscape and your people and it's not sport or wildlife at night, I've never photographed either of those things. It's a non-issue. So that's autofocus. That's focus, autofocus. Okay, it's really starting to rain. I hope you can hear me okay. Next point is the graphical user interface. They're just not getting any prizes for the difference between how they do things. I don't know why they don't change it. Maybe it's just they're too scared of this is what they've been doing. And if they make it good, people will freak out. So the Nikon definitely wins on the menu system by far. The next one is this thing here. This screen. How about that? The Nikon has a screen and the Sony doesn't. That screen there at the top, it just allows you to quickly view what's going on with the camera without really having to dive into the camera or open anything up or look into the viewfinder. It's helpful if you've got the camera down low and you're just standing above it, don't want to flip out the screen, whatever. It's just ease of use, that's nice. So ironically, it's Absolutely raining cats and dogs. I don't know if you can see it on the window here. It might be just out of focus. Hopefully you can hear me okay. It's the weather sealing. It's pretty simple. I would not take this camera out in the rain. I'm very happy to take this camera out in the rain. That's all there is to it. This might break. I've never broken any of my Nikons from rain, and I've been in the rain because I've done event photography. I love shooting in the rain. You can catch this great video here where I was out in heavy rain. So weather sealing, no, yes. I wouldn't take it in the rain. I would take it in the rain, no questions. Another little interesting point of difference is, have a look how the eyepiece on the Nikon sticks further out from the body. Now you might go, but again, this is ergonomics and comfort. Now, I'm a weirdo. I know. Now you all know that already. I shoot left eye. Left eye. So what that means is my nose, if you shoot right eye, your face is out here, right? Right eye. If you shoot left eye, everything's up against the glass. It's really annoying. What this allows me is just to get a couple more, about a centimetre, half an inch off the back of the camera, and I don't touch things with my nose. So right eye people, they don't have any problem. Their nose is out here, easy peasy. Left eye people, nose is up against the buttons and the glass. So this is really a good thing for both eyes, and it's a nice little ergonomic touch, which makes it easier for me. I can get it off the glass. Don't know if you can see that. There's a little bit of a gap here. And then with the Sony, that's impossible, just because of that difference. Even the ergonomics of this eyepiece here is beneficial. The EVF is clearly better on the Nikon, and that's one of the hardest things when moving from a DSLR to mirrorless is the EVFs. Now we know the A7R 4, which I don't have, is better than the 3, but these cameras are so closely spec'd, it seemed to be the most obvious comparison to do. So definitely this has a better EVF, closer to the real world, higher refresh rate. Like one thing I really noticed with the Sony is you shoot, then you get the preview back in the eyepiece, and it's far higher quality than what you're actually seeing. This has the same thing, but the difference between however they're compressing and dropping frame rates or whatever they're doing, quality in general, you might be getting, I don't know what they're doing exactly to do that, but this is closer to the real thing. This is quite a long way from the real thing. And as someone who the light and the texture and actually the way elements in the shot are interacting with each other is really important to me, it's sort of like you're getting a lower bitrate image and you can't actually see those differences. Here you can see more of those differences. So for anyone who is moving from DSLR to mirrorless, I get it. You just can't see as much detail in the universe. And this keeps improving. But the Z7 wins over the A7R III on that front.
As we look at a selection of images from the Nikon Z7 and the A7R III, I just quickly wanted to touch on something that was super important for me to mention, and for some reason I completely forgot. The Z7 allows you to switch between video and stills at the switch of a button. So if your shutter is somewhere, your ISO is somewhere, your aperture is somewhere, and so on, in stills, and then you flick to video, and then you change everything in video, and then you go back to stills, the settings that you had on stills are still there. Whereas on the Sony, it doesn't work like that. So if you want to quickly flick between the two, you can't do it, and you have to keep readjusting your adjustments. And that's actually a big waste of time, and it's a super useful feature on the Nikon. And one that I'm using a lot, and I find it very frustrating on the Sony and magnificent on the Nikon.
Now, one of the biggest challenges for me moving to the A7R III, this guy here, this grip, absolutely tiny. And one of the biggest problems I ever had, I've got the 24 to 105 lens, and my finger doesn't actually fit. You can see my finger hardly fits now. There's probably about 3 millimeters between my finger and the lens. With that lens, it doesn't fit. So if I'm walking around all day with that lens on, it's a great travel lens, I actually end up with a red mark and a dent in my finger. So yeah, ergonomically, it's just too small for me. It's uncomfortable. The buttons to me are not very easy to use. And yeah, if I had a choice, which at the time of buying this I did not, the Z7 was not out, ergonomically, simply ergonomically, I wouldn't have bought this. And just as a quick aside, back in 1997, I'd been working prior to that with a Pentax called the SFXN, crazy name for a camera. Prior to that, the K1000. And I decided I wanted to get one of the two big brands. So I went into a shop and I looked at the Nikon and the Canon, and I had them both in my hand. And there were two reasons why I chose Nikon back in 1997. This is the film days rather than Canon. One was simply how it felt in my hand. The camera felt better in my hand. And the second reason was Canon has a wheel. They have a wheel here for changing shutter or aperture. Nikon, as it's always been, there's this dial and there's this dial. And with the Nikon, you could photograph and change the settings one-handed. With the Canon, you could not. And that set me on the path of never going down the Canon road and going down the Nikon road, which of course I'm super happy with because the cameras through the ages have been fairly similar. So ergonomics just means a lot to me because I'm a guy who might walk around the streets 8 hours, 10 hours. I literally have the camera in my hand half of the time. The other half I'm giving it a rest and it's hanging off something. And you want it to feel good. There is no question from an ergonomic perspective, the Nikon wins by far. Button placements are just much more intuitive, like this one here, which I use for shutter. It's just great. Absolutely, it's just there. It's so good. And just the placement of all the buttons, of course, because I'm a Nikon person, not all the buttons are in the same place as the D850, which we're shooting on right now, but many of them are. But it's really the size of this grip. I've got big hands, and this just fits way, way better. So that's the ergonomics. What's the big elephant in the room? Well, I'm sure those who are not Nikon people are going, yeah, single card slot, man, single card slot. Sure. There is so much you could say about this, and then you could just not talk about it. I do think there's space for a reality check. Come on, guys. So digital cameras, up until 2005, 6, 7, depending on what brand, so many of them just had one card. That's all they had. They had one card. So that was the world we were living in for so many cameras. Point number one. Point number two, when people say to me, it's the end of the world, again, that's hyperbole. Photographers through the last over 100 years photographed with one card, one roll of film. And can I tell you, film is far more fragile, far more dangerous, it's far easier to ruin it, forget what's going on, forget where you're at, forget to even, when you, I don't know, some people out there won't have done this, but you pull the film across, you put it in the auto loader, you wind it. Sometimes it wouldn't wind, so you'd have to come up with your techniques for making sure it's actually in and on. There was so much that could go wrong with film. But this is what we were used to, this is how it worked, and we made it work. And it wasn't the end of the world. And the next point is card failure. If you have best practices, your card failure will happen when you're preparing for your photo shoot. What do I mean by that? Anytime I've had a card go, end of life, is because I always format my cards before every commercial shoot. I stick them in and I format them. And the card and the camera will go, this isn't working. Something's not working. I've had enough. At which point you promptly pull the card out and you put a new card in. I have had probably, 5 or 10 cards let me know that they were end of life that way. Actual card failures whilst shooting, maybe one, maybe two in 20 years of digital. Because I got into digital in my first camera, pocket camera, 97, 98, 99, can't remember, a little crazy little Kodak thing, used CF. Best practices helps check. So you're basically, every time you format, you're getting a new header and you're getting a new fat table and you're getting all those new things. They're sitting there and they're having a bit of a look and they're going, yeah, we're good. Now, of course, that's not perfect. Nothing is guaranteed. Things can fall over. All sorts of things can fall over. But I want to make another point, which is far more important than 2 cards if you are doing a commercial shoot. Far more important. You tell me what happens. Tell me what happens when you're up a mountain, you're in a helicopter, you've gone up a mountain, it took 3 hours to get there, you're shooting away, and your camera dies. Your camera dies. What do? Your camera's dead. Now, if your card dies, if you're a professional, if this is commercial, if this is critical, you've got multiple cards with you. Of course you do. That's what you do, of course, right? You have multiple cards. Equally, you should actually have multiple everything. And I just want to check that all the people are saying, oh, 2 card slots, got to have that for commercial. I want to make sure every single person that says that has 2 cameras when they're out on a professional shoot. And if they require lenses, they've got some overlap with their lenses, so they've got multiple lenses. And have they got more than one flash? If it's critical, because if you're up that mountain 3 hours from the nearest shop to go buy a new camera, you're stuffed. You are stuffed. Sure, 1 card slot. 1 card slot covers one part of a rather massive equation. But I've had just as many cameras fail as cards. Not very many at all. If you buy professional gear, you buy professional cards, the stuff is solid. I get it, 2 cards is better than 1, for sure. But don't bang on about it. Don't bang on about it if you've only got 1 camera when you're out there on that critical shoot, because it can fail too. As can your lens, as can your flash, as can your tripod. When I travel with about, commercially, 9 lenses, 2 or 3 bodies, 10 cards, 6 batteries, everything is in redundancy, everything. Because if I'm out there and I'm on a shoot and it's $40,000 a day to have us all there, makeup artists, models, lights, me, we're all there, you got to have backup for all of it, just like your files. I was interstate earlier this year. I got 3 copies of the files. 1 in my laptop, 1 on a hard drive. I try and keep the ones on the cards if it's a short shoot and I can manage to keep them on the cards. And then I'll give a copy on a hard drive to the client as well. So 3 or 4 copies. Yeah, cards, sure. But make sure if you're going to talk to me about the card slots, you've got redundancy on everything. On everything. Further to the dual card slot thing, and I've written about this extensively in the comments below 6 months ago, SnapBridge. SnapBridge keeps improving. Now don't laugh, SnapBridge used to send a high-res JPEG to your phone or your laptop or wherever you want it to go. Now it sends RAW files. So if you really want, you can have this little guy shooting off RAW files to your device as you go. Now, if you're sports, that might not be helpful. If you're shooting 10 frames a second for an hour, more my sort of work where it's kind of a burst, might be a burst of 100 shots, then we stop and we think for a little while. When I say burst of 100, that might be in like 7 minutes or 5 minutes. So there is that option built in, and then you can also get a wireless FTP adapter to send the files to a laptop. And there's a third option if you're really worried about it, plus if it's commercial, often your client wants to see what's happening as you're shooting, which is what the FTP thing does, as does SnapBridge. Cam Ranger, and they've just announced the Cam Ranger 2, and I don't know as of recording this thing whether it's now ready for shipping. But for, I think it's around $300 US, a little device sits on top, plugs into the USB port, it's called the Cam Ranger 2, sends it to your laptop, and it'll send whatever file you want. Your client can look at it as you're going. You can put it into certain software. You can put it into Photoshop as you're going to see what it looks like on a magazine cover layout and so on. So if you're a professional and you need that sort of thing, for $300 or $400, it's less than another XQD card almost, depending on which size you go for. And of course, it's as big as your hard drive. It actually solves the problem. And it's not BS, it's a real genuine solution that actually gets your files onto a computer in front of your client or onto your computer even for yourself, and you can be a fair distance away from, it might be something in a backpack or whatever, but it genuinely works. So that is another option. So these are all options. Now the other thing I wanted to say about the Z7 is the Z7 is considered by all to not be Nikon's pro camera. I think they've pretty much said it. This is not the pro mirrorless. What they did is they landed two cameras right in the middle of their range, and of course we can see with the Z50, that's the bottom end, and these are right in the middle of their range. This can be used as a pro camera if you want to. I certainly have. Very confident, very happy. In a year of using it, I haven't lost an XQD card, so on and so forth. Done a lot of testing. That's part of using new gear, is you've got to test it out. It's just the wise thing to do. But we will see a Z8 or a Z9, and I believe we'll see that after the D6. They'll put the D6 out, they'll want to get a bit of mileage on the D6, a few sales under their belt, and then maybe within 3 to 6 months, sometime next year, I reckon we will see the pro level mirrorless Z. And it will have 2 slots. There's no question. There's been so much noise about it, there's no question. Plus, I think, like we're hearing in the new top-end flagship Canon and the new Nikon D6, I reckon we'll have in-body raw video recording. So the body will be a bit bigger, and you'll probably want 2 guards for overflow, because those raw files, boom, do they take up so much space. It's not funny. So anyhow, the 1 card slot, going all the way back to the start, there's lots of reasons why it doesn't scare someone like me. Best practices, buying the best quality media, XQD and CF Express are by far the most robust formats we've ever seen and ever had. I have had CF failures and SD failures. I've never had an XQD failure. And they're designed to be rock solid. Doesn't mean it won't happen, but I'm okay. I'm okay right now with that. Secondly, if you're not okay, or you might have a professional need, get yourself something like a Cam Ranger, and then you can shoot the files off somewhere else. Your client can see as you're shooting. You're tethered wirelessly. Awesome. Everybody loves that. That's a workaround. And or the Z8 coming, Z8/Z9 coming soon. They're all your options. The Sony does have 2 card slots. Ace, they're SD. In the case of this one is fast and one is slow. Why did they do that? At least they fixed it in the A7R 4. So yes, you've got your redundancy. That's dual card slots. Now another element that is really important, weather sealing. There's very little to talk about. Weather sealing, excellent. Weather sealing, not excellent. Scared of using this in rain? Not scared of using this in rain at all. That's it. So weather sealing, win. Okay, the next thing I wanted to talk about is lenses. Oh yeah, boom. As I touched on before, at launch, you know, these things are always a little thin on the ground. The E was thin on the ground, and it's grown now over the course of 6 years to a great selection of lenses. Fabulous. And we can see with Nikon's latest roadmap, which came out just a couple of weeks ago, there is probably, from my perspective, 90% of the lenses that you might want or need are now in that roadmap. And they're all coming out very soon. The only one that we're really hanging on right now, which is running late, which is a good thing from my perspective. It means Nikon are making sure it's as perfect as they can make it. They promised us it would be out this year, and they've got a little bit of time yet to execute that. And that's the 70-200 2.8. Very excited to see that lens. So when that comes out, you have got the basics of what any photographer could need to do their job. Whether you're a pro or an amateur or a hobbyist or an enthusiast, you'll have the 14-30, the 24-70 and the 70-200. You've got all that covered. With a camera like the Z7, if you really want to reach beyond that, then you can go into DX mode and you're up at 300 mils. That's a great starting point. And they have announced the 100-400, I think it was. I think that'll be coming out next year. And then the only lenses that really might be missing is something like a tilt shift, but the reality is you can F to Z the tilt shifts. They're they're very manual lenses, manual aperture, manual focus, using the current F line of tilt shifts. Is perfect and it works fine. And I will be doing a video with my 24 and 85 tilt shifts on the Z. So from a lens perspective, I'm happy. I feel like give it another 6 to 12 months and you're going to have a good, solid, basic set of stuff. Not forgetting that the F lenses adapt brilliantly. And I think in many cases, they actually work better on the Z. I know this is crazy. They work better on the Z than they do on the F, and that's because of in-body stabilization. I've got my 85mm 1.4 It's now stabilized. I can use it to do different things. And another part I love about that 85 1.4 being stabilized, another thing that I love is you can see in your EVF the depth of field. You can see it. So whatever you dial up, you can have a look at it. And it does, you know the old button you press on the side of your camera there that gives you the depth of field, makes everything dark. These guys, they work around that. So you can see your depth of field as you're going. Which is just sort of nothing, it's just sort of something that you never had before. So it's just a bonus. For example, I've just said that the 70 to 200 2.8 is not out for the Z, but the F version of it works brilliantly. I've shot video with it, I've shot stills with it, it just looks fantastic. So the reality is, unlike Sony when it first came out, you can adapt the F glass, and from my personal perspective, it is a better experience than it is on the F mount cameras. Now, I can hear already people will complain, they'll go, yeah, but what about the adapter, and that's also annoying. Sure, yep, life isn't perfect, but if you've got a great set of F glass, you can still just use it like an F camera. You just leave the adapter on there and pull it on and pull it off, pull it on, pull it off. You've got all your lenses. You've got all your lenses. Every F mount lens will work in some way or another. It's a very impressive experience. And when I first read about it, I was a little bit worried about it, but I am not worried at all. It's so good. Yeah, so the F to Z, look at it on the 14 to 24 2.8, and it's just like using it on the F mount. Sure, it's a bit ugly and a bit difficult, but it works, and it's solid. And all the F mount glass, no problem at all. So I'm a massive fan of how well Nikon have executed this. It's just absolutely astonishing. So that's the lenses. You've really got nothing to worry about at this point. There is a good growing amount of native glass, and you can use all the F glass. It couldn't really be better, I've got to be honest with you, for such a changeover from DSLR to mirrorless. Battery life, totally true. The Sony is probably slightly better. Doesn't bother me at all. You just grab a battery pack, or because Nikon have used the same batteries that are in the D800, the D810, the D850, probably the D500, I'm not sure, I don't have one of those. I have got 7 or 8 of those batteries. I never run out. I can cannibalize it from another camera if I need to. It's not an issue. This camera will last the average day, and you'll get to the end of it on one battery. Of average. If you're doing high usage, sure, you'll need a second battery, and that's fine. The other thing I find I'm doing is I am using the external battery, and if you stop for lunch or stop for a break, you whack it in, you get a bit of charging going. Either option will work to keeping your battery going for almost a whole day. But I just think batteries when they're, you know, let's just get realistic about this. Batteries when they're this size, it's like a box of matches. It's just a non-issue to talk about it. It's like mirrorless uses more power. Maybe this gets you 20% further mileage, but that is not a reason to buy one or the other. If you're in the Nikon ecosystem, it's not a reason. So yeah, they're similar. They're similar enough. Neither of them lasts as long as an SLR. They just don't. That's just the way it is. High ISO. I think the Nikon's better. I think it's better at it. And dynamic range, I think it's better. Definitely think those two things are better for sure. And again, I am someone who likes to push ISOs high. I like to run around handheld at night. And I like to drill into the shadows. And the first Sonys were bad because of their compressed RAWs. It just really didn't work. It was quite profound. And I literally found that out and picked up my A7R and put it on the shelf and didn't touch it for about 6 years until I started doing vlogging, and then I used it as a video camera, which is fine. That's great. I do think Nikon have the advantage on that front. Simple as that. And it might be a personal thing on how the files are manipulated. But again, I wouldn't not buy the Sony because of that point. I just think there's just a little bit more headroom in there, and the ISO is a little bit better when it's a little bit higher. It's a personal thing. And again, the new A7R 4, 60 megapixels, it's got some ridiculous numbers around it. I haven't used it. Sony might have again come ahead of the Z7 at that point. But we're not comparing the 4, we're comparing the 3 and the Z7. So ISO, dynamic range, better on the Z7. The touchscreen. The touchscreen on the Z7 has more functionality. You can do more touching and scrolling and playing and interacting with it. I'm not going to show you here in this right now, but it's just a more useful touchscreen there on the back. So, yeah, it's interesting. This is the exposure compensation button here, and the shutter button is this tiny little thing. I would have made it around the other way. But what that says to me is they expect most of their users to be shooting on some sort of auto, and they change the brightness or darkness of the picture using exposure compensation, as opposed to, because this button's way bigger and way easier to find, as opposed to this button, which is the actual shutter button, which is how I change my light with shutter and aperture. So I think there's just an emphasis thing there that's just a little ergonomic thing that means a lot. It means a lot. The back screen is more useful on the Z7, no question about that. So guys, look, this is my real world usage. I don't really like diving too heavily into all of the specs, just reading that out, because sometimes the specs don't really tell us how it actually works at the end of the day. These two cameras are both amazing, and you can't go wrong with whichever one you buy. There's no question, you can't go wrong. I would recommend, if you're a Nikon user and you're thinking about mirrorless, there is absolutely no reason not to keep using your F-mount glass and move to a very competent, very powerful, fabulous camera, which I think delivers better image quality and a better ergonomic user experience. And to just quickly reiterate those high-level points of difference, yes, this focuses slightly faster in the dark with action. It's true. But that's about its only main advantage besides the 2 card slots. That's it. This thing does everything else better, and it's got a better future. If you're a Nikon person, there's just no question in my mind. Stay where you've got batteries and lenses and flashes and everything else. It all works. If you're a Sony person and you're coming from another A7, well, of course, you've got the glass. And there's no question, magnificent camera. Stay with it. If you don't want to get the 4 because it's just a couple of grand more, you can't go wrong with this camera. And if you're in the Sony ecosystem, you know what it's like. You know what you're used to. You know about the ergonomics. You know about the buttons and all those things. So Sony users, you stay with your Sony. If you're neither of those, then think about your use case. If you're into landscapes and portraits and almost everything else except for ultra high speed at night, you can get this. I think it's the better camera. If you want slightly better face acquisition, and I'm talking about an 8 out of 10 versus a 10 out of 10. If you want slightly better focus in low light, I'm talking about a 7 out of 10 versus a 10 out of 10. And if you're a wildlife shooter and you've got high action birds flying around, those 3 use cases, best in market, face detect, better focus by a smidge in low light with action, better wildlife focus, then right now, today, the Sonys are better. No question. These do it. Don't get me wrong. It's not that these can't do it. They do it, but this is a bit faster. Okay? But everything else, if you're a streetscape photographer, a commercial photographer who shoots people who are just walking or whatever, portrait photographer, wedding photographer, everything else. So I would say, if you're in either of these and you're wondering which way to go, do I go the Sony? Do I go the Nikon? From my perspective, this is by far the better all-rounder. Another advantage in the video section is that this camera has the capacity to shoot RAW with an external recorder, video RAW, straight off the sensor to a hard drive. This guy can't do it. So if high-level video is something you want to experiment with or something that you need to do, yes, no. Simple as that. Yes, no. Z6 can do it as well when the patch comes out, and it's coming out any second now. Might be out at the time of you watching this. It's highly likely. So the summation of all of this is, from my perspective, this is an astonishing all-rounder camera. Just like the D850 that we're filming on here today has been considered by the industry the greatest all-rounder of its era. I believe the Z7 right now fits in that category in mirrorless. Now I know it's a big call, but it can do things that this can't do. And all-rounder means all-rounder. So all-rounder means, yeah, there's some things, some little use case parts where it's not right at the edge, it's back a bit, but it does things that this doesn't do. This can focus at night. This can focus at night a little better. This can face detect quite well. This face detects a little bit better. But this can shoot raw video when the patch comes out. Any second now. Might be out now. It has a better EVF. I believe it has better raw files, a better outcome in general. And the final major elephant in the room, which is going to drive people nuts, looking forward to hearing from you. So finally, the Z mount. The Z mount, it's the shortest, it's the largest, it's the most future-proofed. Right now, you can get an adapter to go E to Z. I reckon you're going to be able to get an adapter to go from kind of anything to Z, because it is the shortest and it is the largest. It also means, optically, Nikon may well have the most latitude to come up with the most interesting lenses. And I don't think they've really pushed the envelope. There's only one example where they're playing with that idea, which is with the Noct. But beyond that, we're not seeing it yet. They want to get all the basics out there so we can all go out and shoot, and then they'll make some cracker lenses that cost a fortune but do things that we haven't even dreamt of. That's what this mount can do. That's what this mount is all about. So if you want to buy into the most opportunity, the largest all-rounder, buy into a company that's been making cameras for decades and decades. They've been making this sort of glass for decades and decades. This is what they've done. Cameras like this. Sony, don't get me wrong, an amazing company. They do all sorts of amazing things, but they haven't been making these things for years and years. They bought Minolta. They bought a lot of Minolta's technology. From that, they created this stuff. Sure, they know about lenses. They've been making video cameras for television for years. Video cameras for over your shoulder, video cameras for mums and dads just like me for years. But they're a broader company. They do more different things. Their focus is everywhere. Nikon's focus is much sharper. A much larger percentage of their company is about optics, whether it's microscopes or binoculars. So if I was going to back a horse, and this is going to be controversial, but if I wanted to back a horse in this space of photography and the hybrid over to video, I would back this horse. I think they've got the better mount. I think they've got the better pedigree. And it's not to say, I'm not saying this isn't a great product. I'm not saying that. So don't hear that I'm not saying that's a great product. This is a great product, but this has legacy. Legacy in exactly the area that we need it to have legacy. This does not. This has the more superior mount. This does not. This has better ergonomics, which means a lot to me. This has lesser ergonomics. This actually has better files coming out of it, only by a smidge, but that means a lot to me. And I think the glass that we're seeing already is outstanding. That 50mm at that price point is outstanding. The fact that it's on sale now in Europe, I think it's something like £400 or £500, something ridiculous. I was able to get it for $800. I've seen it for $700. People are calling it right now one of the best lenses that exists. It's hard to understand at that price point. I think there's so much that we don't know about the Z yet. There's such a huge ceiling. If you're a Nikon person, don't give up on Nikon just because of one card slot. That would be ridiculous. Either wait a little while or get a Z50 if you're itchy to get mirrorless. But wait, all your glass, all your batteries, all your flashes, that stuff works. If you're a Sony person, stick with the Sonys. They are amazing tools that do so much stuff. There is a lot of tech in there. So as always, thank you so much for watching. I would love to know, are you an E? Are you a Z? Are you neither and you're not sure? I thoroughly would go the Nikon. I think it's the better all-rounder, and ultimately this product will mature and evolve into something very special. Because this is new. This is only about a year old, this mount, whereas this is 6 or 7 years old. We have an understanding of where they're heading. we have an understanding of what they can do with their mount because they've been at it a little bit longer. It's got such great pedigree. So I'd love to hear what you think. Are you thinking Sony? Are you thinking Nikon? Are you thinking neither? Where are you going? What do you want? What are you going to do? Oh, I can't wait to hear it. So as always, thank you so much for watching. I look forward to seeing you again. If this is your first time here, subscribe, and then we can see each other again. Please share, it makes us all smarter. And please like, because it helps get the word out there, and we love to get the word out there. Oh, it's been so good to see you. Thank you so much for watching. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye!